Sharks are nature's ancient enforcers, patrolling the blue with cold precision and calm authority. Born of a lineage older than dinosaurs, they command the ocean not with chaos, but with control. Their attacks, though rare, strike fear deeper than their teeth ever could. A reminder that in their realm, we are guests, not rulers. Each encounter is a clash of two worlds, curiosity versus survival. But beyond the myths and media, sharks are not monsters. They're masterpieces of evolution, reminding us that power often swims in silence. The morning of April 15, 2025, began like any other day for the crew aboard the USS Steadfast. The naval vessel was conducting routine exercises approximately 30 miles off the California coastline, with clear skies and relatively calm waters creating perfect conditions for their training operations. Lieutenant James Harrington, a 10-year veteran of the Navy, supervised a group of sailors as they performed standard maintenance inspections along the ship's starboard side. At 0900 hours, Petty Officer Marcus Collins was leaning over the edge of the deck, examining a hull section flagged for inspection in yesterday's report. The 28-year-old sailor from Nebraska had joined the Navy 5 years ago, seeking adventure beyond his landlocked hometown. What happened next would provide more adventure than he had ever bargained for. Without warning, the ocean's surface erupted in a violent spray of white foam. A massive shadow emerged beneath the waves, a 21-foot great white shark, one of the largest specimens ever recorded in these waters. Before Collins could react, the enormous predator breached the surface with astonishing speed and power, its massive jaws clamping around his torso. Lieutenant Harrington looked up at the sound of the splash just in time to witness the horrifying scene unfold. The shark's momentum carried it partially out of the water, revealing its immense size to the stunned crew members. In an instant, Collins was yanked from the deck and dragged beneath the waves, his shocked expression barely registering what was happening. Panic erupted across the deck. Sailors who had been calmly going about their duties moments before now scrambled in different directions, some rushing to sound the alarm. In contrast, others grabbed nearby equipment useful in a rescue attempt. Chief Petty Officer Ramirez, supervising another team nearby, immediately took control of the situation, barking orders to initiate emergency protocols for a man overboard. Beneath the surface, Collins found himself in a desperate struggle for survival. The initial bite had torn through his wetsuit but miraculously missed inflicting critical damage to his vital organs, instead gripping primarily the thick material of his gear. The murky water swirled around him as the shark began its instinctive feeding behavior, dragging its prey deeper before starting to consume it. Drawing on his naval training, Collins fought against the instinct to panic. He knew that struggling wildly would trigger the shark's predatory response further. Instead, he directed his efforts toward the shark's sensitive snout and eyes. With his right hand, he struck the predator's gills, one of the few vulnerable areas on the animal's otherwise armored body. The shark, perhaps surprised by its prey's resistance, momentarily loosened its grip. It was all the opportunity Collins needed. With a powerful kick, he broke free from the weakened hold and began swimming toward the surface, each stroke fueled by pure adrenaline and the desperate need to breathe. Above water, the crew of the USS Steadfast had mobilized with remarkable efficiency. Within minutes of the attack, a rescue team led by Lieutenant Harrington had deployed a rigid-hull inflatable boat. Chief Medical Officer Patricia Rodriguez stood ready with emergency medical supplies, her face set in grim determination as she prepared for what she might encounter. As Collins broke the surface, gasping for air approximately 20 yards from the ship, he immediately began waving his arms and shouting for help. Blood from his wounds spread through the water around him, a dangerous signal that could potentially bring the shark back to finish what it had started. At the helm of the rescue boat, Petty Officer Dwayne Jackson spotted Collins and immediately steered in his direction. The crew was acutely aware that every second counted, not just because of Collins' injuries, but because the blood in the water made a second attack increasingly likely. As they approached, they could see the massive dorsal fin of the great white circling back toward their injured comrade. With remarkable precision, Jackson maneuvered the rescue boat alongside Collins, just as the shark made its second approach. Seaman First Class Emily Chen reached over the side, grasping Collins's outstretched hand. and with the help of 2 other crew members, hauled him aboard moments before the shark's jaws snapped shut on empty water. Collins collapsed on the floor of the rescue boat, his breathing labored but steady. His wetsuit was torn across the midsection and right leg, with lacerations visible beneath the shredded material. Remarkably, none of his wounds appeared life-threatening. The shark's initial bite had caught mostly the thick neoprene of his gear rather than flesh. The return to the USS Steadfast was tense but swift. As they approached, medical teams stood ready on deck. Dr. Rodriguez quickly assessed Collins's condition as he was transferred from the rescue boat. The sailor had sustained multiple lacerations to his torso and right thigh, with significant bruising from the pressure of the shark's jaws, but no critical injuries to major blood vessels or internal organs. Rodriguez and her team worked methodically in the ship's medical bay to clean and suture Collins's wounds. The sailor remained conscious throughout the procedure, his voice steady as he recounted the attack to Lieutenant Commander Wilson, who had been dispatched to get a preliminary report on the incident. News of the attack spread quickly throughout the vessel. For many of the younger sailors, this was their first direct encounter with the raw power of nature at its most primal. The incident was a stark reminder that despite their advanced technology and military training, they were still visitors in an environment where creatures like the great white shark reigned supreme. Captain Robert Montgomery, the commanding officer of the USS Steadfast, ordered an immediate review of all overboard safety protocols. He also contacted marine biology experts to report the shark's unusual size and aggressive behavior. As such, a large specimen was rare in these waters. By evening, Collins was stable and resting comfortably, already regaling his fellow sailors with the tale of his encounter. The ship's mood had transformed from shock to relief, though a new respect for the ocean's dangers had been firmly established. Marine biologists later theorized that the unusually large shark might have been drawn to the area by changes in water temperature affecting its prey patterns. The incident would later be documented in Navy safety protocols as one of the most significant recorded shark encounters in naval operations history. For Petty Officer Marcus Collins, it was an experience that would leave both physical scars and an incredible story of survival against one of nature's most formidable predators. 2004. The morning had started promisingly for 34-year-old fisherman Michael Andrews. With years of experience navigating the waters off the coast of Mozambique, he had set out alone in his small fishing boat, a weathered but reliable vessel that had served him well for nearly a decade. The skies were clear and weather reports had predicted favorable conditions, perfect for a day's catch to sell at the local market in Pemba. By midday, Michael had ventured nearly 15 miles offshore, following a promising school of yellowfin tuna. His small craft, though modest, was equipped with basic navigation equipment and emergency supplies, standard precautions for someone who understood the unpredictable nature of the Indian Ocean. What the weather reports had failed to predict, however, was the rapid formation of a storm system moving in from the northeast. The first indication of trouble came when Michael noticed the darkening skies on the horizon. Having grown up near these waters, he recognized the telltale signs of an approaching squall and immediately began preparations to return to shore. But nature proved faster than his small outboard motor could manage. Within 30 minutes, the previously calm sea transformed into a churning mass of whitecaps and swells. As the storm intensified, waves grew to 12 feet in height, battering the small fishing vessel relentlessly. Michael struggled to maintain control, fighting against the powerful forces pushing his boat sideways into the dangerous trough between waves. Despite his experience and skill, a particularly massive wave struck the boat broadside, capsizing it almost instantly. The sudden violence of the capsizing threw Michael into the turbulent waters. Gasping and disoriented, he surfaced to find his boat overturned and rapidly taking on water. Years of maritime experience had taught him to remain calm in emergencies. He quickly assessed his situation, gathering what floating debris he could reach, primarily a large section of the boat's wooden deck that had broken loose in the impact. Michael clung to this makeshift raft for hours as the storm gradually subsided. By nightfall, the immediate danger of drowning had passed, but he found himself adrift in open ocean, miles from the nearest shoreline with no means of propulsion or communication. His emergency locator beacon had been stored in a compartment of the boat that was now inaccessible beneath the waves. The first night passed slowly, with Michael conserving his energy and rationing the single bottle of water that had miraculously stayed in his pocket throughout the ordeal. He knew that in these warm waters, dehydration posed as significant a threat as drowning. As dawn broke on the second day, the full gravity of his situation became clear. No vessels were visible on the horizon, and the currents likely carried him further from established shipping lanes. It was mid-morning when Michael first noticed the distinctive dorsal fin cutting through the water approximately 50 yards away. Having spent his life on these waters, he immediately recognized it as belonging to an oceanic white-tip shark, one of the species most frequently implicated in attacks on shipwreck survivors. Unlike the more common reef sharks that typically avoided human contact, oceanic whitetips were known for their bold curiosity and opportunistic feeding behavior. Initially, the shark maintained its distance, making wide circles around Michael's position as if assessing the situation. Each passing hour brought the predator closer, its circuits gradually tightening. By early afternoon, it was approaching within 10 yards of the floating debris, its distinctive white-tipped fins visible as it glided beneath the surface. Michael knew enough about shark behavior to understand that sudden movements or splashing could trigger a predatory response. He remained as still as possible on his makeshift raft, only occasionally adjusting his position to prevent his limbs from dangling in the water. The psychological strain was immense, watching a predator's methodical approach while being completely exposed and vulnerable. As the afternoon wore on, the shark's behavior became increasingly bold. It made closer passes, sometimes swimming directly beneath Michael's floating debris. During one such pass, the shark brushed against the underside of the wooden planks, causing the entire structure to shift alarmingly. Michael struggled to maintain his position, inadvertently creating splashes that attracted the shark's immediate attention. What happened next occurred with terrifying speed. The oceanic whitetip, likely interpreting the disturbance as a sign of wounded prey, charged directly at Michael. Its powerful jaws clamped down on his left forearm as he instinctively raised it defensively. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, crushing pressure followed by the searing sensation of flesh being torn. Survival instinct took over. Driven by adrenaline and desperation, Michael struck back with the only weapon available, a splintered piece of wood from his makeshift raft. With his right hand, he drove the jagged end of the plank directly into the shark's sensitive gills. The effect was immediate. The shark recoiled, releasing its grip on his arm and retreating several yards. Blood poured from the deep lacerations on Michael's arm, spreading an alarming red slick across the water's surface. Using strips torn from his shirt, he fashioned a crude tourniquet, knowing that blood loss and the scent of blood in the water now presented dual threats to his survival. The shark remained nearby for several hours, occasionally approaching but seemingly more cautious after the counterattack. Michael remained vigilant through the night, fighting against exhaustion and blood loss while keeping pressure on his wound. By morning, his situation had grown dire. Dehydration, exposure, and injury had severely weakened him. The distant sound of an engine first registered in Michael's semi-conscious state. A local fishing vessel departed early from Pemba Harbor and spotted the unusual debris floating in their regular fishing grounds. As they approached, the crew immediately recognized a distressed man and initiated a rescue. The fishermen worked quickly to bring Michael aboard, shocked by his condition and the severity of his injury. One crew member, who had basic medical training, properly dressed the wound while another radioed for emergency assistance. As they sped back to shore, Michael slipped in and out of consciousness, the combination of blood loss, dehydration, and exhaustion taking their toll. At Pemba's regional hospital, doctors worked to save Michael's arm, which had sustained significant tissue damage and multiple deep lacerations. The attending physician later remarked that the clean nature of some of the cuts, characteristic of shark teeth, had made surgical repair more straightforward than expected. After several hours of surgery and multiple blood transfusions, Michael's condition stabilized. During his recovery, marine biologists interviewed Michael about the encounter. His detailed descriptions of the shark's size, coloration, and behavior provided valuable data for their ongoing studies of oceanic whitetip populations in the region. Researchers noted that warming ocean temperatures had pushed these typically deep-water predators closer to coastal areas in recent years. 6 months after the incident, Michael had regained approximately 70% of function in his injured arm. Though he no longer ventured out alone in his small boat, he continued working in the fishing industry, now as part of a crew on a larger vessel equipped with modern safety equipment and shark deterrent systems. His experience had transformed him into an advocate for maritime safety among the local fishing community, regularly sharing his story as a cautionary tale about proper preparation and respect for the ocean's most formidable predators. The coastal town of Gansbaai, South Africa, has built its reputation as the great white shark capital of the world. For most visitors, this meant an exhilarating opportunity to view these magnificent predators from the safety of cage diving expeditions. For the Petrov family from Moscow, however, it would become the setting for an unimaginable tragedy. It was the year 2007. Dmitry Petrov, a 42-year-old investment banker, had planned the South African holiday as a special treat for his wife Elena's 38th birthday. Their 10-year-old daughter, Katya, an enthusiastic young naturalist who collected shark teeth and devoured marine biology books, had been particularly excited about visiting a place famous for its shark population. The family had arrived in Cape Town 3 days earlier, spending time at Table Mountain and the Cape Peninsula before driving to Gansbaai for what was supposed to be the highlight of their trip. The morning had dawned clear and beautiful, with gentle breezes and sunshine that sparkled across the waters of Walker Bay. The Petrovs had booked a cage diving expedition for the following day, but decided to spend their first morning enjoying the scenic public beach near their rented holiday cottage. The area was not known as a swimming beach. Locals tended to avoid it due to the nearby seal colony that attracted great white sharks, but no explicit warning signs were posted that morning. Dmitry had settled on the shore with a novel, while Elena and Katya decided to cool off in the shallow waters. Both were strong swimmers. Elena competed at the university level in Russia, and Katya inherited her mother's natural affinity for water. They waited approximately 30 yards from shore, where the water reached just above Katya's waist. From his position on the beach, Dmitry occasionally glanced up to check on his wife and daughter. The water was remarkably clear that day, with visibility extending several feet below the surface. Nothing seemed amiss as Elena showed Katya how to float on her back, supporting her daughter with gentle hands as they laughed together. The attack occurred with such speed that witnesses later struggled to describe the sequence of events. One moment, the mother and daughter were floating peacefully. The next, the water around them erupted as a massive great white shark, estimated later by marine biologists to be approximately 16 feet in length, surged upward from the depths. The predator's initial strike targeted Elena, its powerful jaws clamping around her right leg with devastating force. The woman's scream cut through the peaceful morning air as she was briefly lifted out of the water by the shark's momentum. Katya, only an arm's length away, instinctively reached for her mother just as the shark released its first bite and swung back around. On the shore, Dmitry dropped his book and jumped to his feet, his mind struggling to process the nightmarish scene unfolding before him. Other beachgoers froze in horror as they realized what was happening. The distinctive dorsal fin and thrashing water left no doubt that a large shark was attacking swimmers. The second strike caught Katya as she tried to reach her mother. The shark's teeth tore into the girl's side, pulling her under the surface. Elena, despite her catastrophic injuries, lunged toward her daughter, maternal instinct overriding personal safety and pain. For a terrifying moment, both disappeared beneath the churning, blood-stained water. Dmitry charged into the surf, but two local men intercepted him before he could swim out. Their physical restraint was the only thing that prevented Dmitry from becoming another victim, as his training as a former competitive swimmer would have quickly carried him to the attack site. Fortunately, two lifeguards from a neighboring beach had been practicing rescue maneuvers nearby. Upon hearing the commotion, they grabbed their rescue boards and paddled toward the attack site. Their arrival likely saved Katya's life, as the shark had withdrawn temporarily after its second strike. A common behavior pattern where the predator retreats to allow blood loss to weaken its prey before returning to feed. The lifeguards reached Elena first. She was barely conscious, but still calling her daughter's name. Her right leg had sustained catastrophic damage, with arterial bleeding that had already turned the surrounding water crimson. The first lifeguard, Thomas Kumalo, applied an emergency tourniquet using the leash from his rescue board while helping Elena onto the board. The second lifeguard, Sean Murray, located Katya floating face down approximately 15 feet away. The girl had a massive wound extending from her right hip across her lower back. Murray flipped her over, confirmed she was still breathing, and quickly positioned her on his rescue board. Both lifeguards began paddling toward shore, constantly scanning the water for signs of the shark's return. By this time, someone had called emergency services. Beachgoers formed a human chain extending into the shallow water to help bring the victims ashore quickly. Dmitry collapsed beside his wife and daughter as they lay on the sand, his anguished cries echoing across the beach. A retired nurse who happened to be present immediately began administering first aid, focusing primarily on controlling the catastrophic bleeding both victims had sustained. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes after the attack. Paramedics worked frantically to stabilize both patients before transporting and administering blood products and intravenous fluids. Elena had lost consciousness by this point, her skin ashen from blood loss despite the emergency interventions. Katya remained conscious but in shock, her small body beginning to shut down from trauma and blood loss. Both victims were airlifted to a hospital in Cape Town, the nearest facility with a level 1 trauma center. Elena was immediately taken to surgery, where medical teams fought to repair the massive vascular damage to her leg. Despite receiving multiple blood transfusions and the efforts of a skilled surgical team, she suffered a cardiac arrest 3 hours into the procedure. Resuscitation attempts continued for 27 minutes before she was pronounced dead at around 3:45 p.m. Katya underwent 8 hours of surgery to repair damage to her kidney, liver, and extensive soft tissue injuries. The surgical team was ultimately able to stabilize her condition, though her recovery prognosis remained guarded. She would require multiple follow-up surgeries and extensive rehabilitation. Dmitry maintained a vigil at his daughter's bedside, devastated by the loss of his wife, and terrified that his daughter might still succumb to her injuries. When Katya regained consciousness 3 days after the attack, her first question was about her mother. The moment when Dmitry had to tell his daughter that Elena had not survived was described by attending medical staff as heartbreaking beyond words. Katya eventually recovered enough to resume many normal activities, though she would always bear the physical and emotional scars of that terrible day in Gansbai. The experience transformed her childhood interest in marine biology into a passionate commitment to understanding the delicate balance between human safety and marine conservation. This path would eventually lead her to become a respected marine biologist specializing in predator behavior. 2011, Carlos Vega had been night diving for nearly 15 years. The 38-year-old Nicaraguan fisherman preferred the quiet solitude of the nocturnal underwater world, away from the crowded daytime fishing spots where competition for the best catches was fierce. Over the years, he had developed a reputation among the local fishing community for his exceptional ability to navigate the dark waters and return with impressive hauls of snapper, grouper, and lobster. On this particular evening, Carlos convinced his younger cousin Marco to join him for a night dive approximately 2 miles offshore from the coastal village of San Juan del Sur. Marco was relatively inexperienced with night diving but eager to learn from his skilled relative. The conditions seemed ideal: calm seas, a clear night sky, and a 3/4 moon providing ambient light on the water's surface. They anchored their small fishing boat over a reef system known locally as La Corona, a productive spot where Carlos had made good catches in previous weeks. After a final equipment check, ensuring their diving lights were functioning properly, spears were secure, and catch bags attached to their weight belts, the two men entered the water shortly after 10 p.m. The water was warm, approximately 79 degrees Fahrenheit, with visibility extending about 15 feet in the beam of their underwater lights. They descended to around 30 feet, where the reef structure created numerous crevices and overhangs, providing hiding places for their nocturnal prey. Carlos signaled for Marco to stay within visual range as they began their hunt, moving methodically along the contours of the reef. For the first 45 minutes, the dive proceeded exactly as planned. Carlos had already speared 2 substantial red snappers and a grouper, securing them to his catch bag. Marco had been less successful but was enjoying the experience, pointing excitedly at the variety of marine life their lights revealed. Moray eels extending from rocky crevices, lobsters scuttling across the sandy bottom, and the occasional ray gliding effortlessly over the reef. Neither diver noticed the bull shark's approach. Unlike many shark species that prefer open water, bull sharks are comfortable in shallow coastal environments and are known for their aggressive territorial behavior. This particular specimen, later estimated to be approximately 10 feet in length, had likely been attracted by the blood trail from Carlos's catches. Carlos had just positioned himself near a promising overhang, his diving light illuminating a large lobster, when a shadow passed through the periphery of his vision. Years of experience triggered an immediate sense of danger, but the shark charged from his right side before he could react. The initial strike was devastatingly powerful. The bull shark's jaws clamped onto Carlos's right thigh, the rows of serrated teeth easily penetrating his wetsuit and into the muscle beneath. The impact knocked his diving light from his grip, spinning through the water before resting on the sandy bottom. Its beam created eerie shadows across the reef. Pain exploded through Carlos's body, but his survival instinct immediately kicked in. He remembered the advice of an old fisherman who had survived a similar encounter years before. Fight back, hard and direct. Using his spear, he jabbed forcefully at the shark's sensitive gills, applying as much pressure as he could muster despite the excruciating pain radiating from his leg. The shark momentarily released its grip, circling back with the methodical determination of bull sharks. Carlos could see the animal now in the beam of his fallen diving light. Its substantial girth, the distinctive short, blunt snout that gave the species its name, and the cold, assessing eyes that seemed to calculate its next move. Exploring about 20 feet away, Marco turned at the commotion and instantly recognized the dire situation. Despite his inexperience and the surge of fear that washed over him, he swam rapidly toward his cousin, his diving light illuminating the surreal underwater confrontation. Before Marco could reach him, the shark attacked again. This time it targeted Carlos's midsection, powerful jaws clamping onto his side just below the ribs. The force of the bite nearly knocked the regulator from Carlos's mouth, and he felt a sickening sensation as teeth penetrated his wetsuit and tore into his flesh. Fighting through the pain and rising panic, Carlos jabbed his spear directly into the shark's eye with all his remaining strength. The shark released its grip, shaking its massive head in what appeared to be discomfort before beginning to circle again, now at a slightly greater distance but not abandoning its attack. By this time, Marco had reached Carlos. Seeing the blood clouding the water around his cousin, he recognized they had only moments before the shark would be drawn back for another potentially fatal attack. He grabbed Carlos under the arms and began a rapid ascent toward the surface, careful not to rise too quickly despite the emergency. The bull shark made one final approach as they neared the surface, but Marco kicked powerfully with his fins, creating enough disturbance in the water to deter the predator momentarily. They broke the surface approximately 30 yards from their anchored boat, Carlos now barely conscious from blood loss and shock. Marco's shouts alerted Ramon, a fellow fisherman crewing the boat during their dive. He immediately started the engine and maneuvered toward the struggling divers, reaching over the side to help haul Carlos aboard. The effort was complicated by the need to remove Carlos's tank and weight belt while keeping pressure on his most severe wounds. Once aboard, Ramon quickly assessed the situation. Carlos had sustained major lacerations to his right thigh, with muscle tissue visible through the torn wetsuit. The bite to his torso, while less deep, had left a semicircular pattern of puncture wounds that were bleeding steadily. Using the boat's first aid kit, Ramon applied pressure bandages to the leg wound, while Marco steered the vessel toward shore at maximum speed. The journey to the coastal clinic took 23 agonizing minutes. Carlos drifted in and out of consciousness, his skin growing increasingly pale as shock set in despite his companion's efforts to keep him warm and maintain pressure on his wounds. They radioed ahead and medical staff were waiting at the small dock when they arrived. Dr. Elena Morales, the night physician in a medical clinic, immediately recognized the severity of Carlos's condition. The facility wasn't equipped for major trauma. Still, she and her team worked quickly to stabilize him, starting IV fluids and administering antibiotics, a critical step given the high risk of infection from shark bites, which often introduce bacteria from the animal's mouth directly into the wounds. After initial stabilization, Carlos was transferred by ambulance to the regional hospital in Rivas, where surgical teams worked for over 6 hours to repair the damage to his leg. which included severed muscle tissue and a partially damaged femoral artery. The wounds to his torso, while dramatic in appearance, had fortunately missed vital organs. Recovery was a long and difficult process. Carlos required multiple surgeries to repair the damaged muscle tissue in his thigh, followed by months of physical therapy to regain mobility. The psychological impact proved equally challenging. Nightmares and anxiety about returning to the water plagued him throughout his recovery. The experience transformed Carlos into an advocate for shark safety education within his fishing community. He frequently spoke to younger fishermen about proper precautions, emphasizing the importance of avoiding night dives in areas that harbor bull sharks and never keeping caught fish attached to one's body while in the water. Over the past decade, great white shark activity has sharply risen in the waters off Cape Cod. On a crisp September morning in 2014, the United States Coast Guard cutter Sturgeon Crew, a 45-foot Coast Guard response boat out of Provincetown, was running a search and rescue drill about a mile off Nauset Beach. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Wilson had scheduled the exercise to train her team for water rescues in high-risk areas. Petty Officer Second Class Jason Harper, 29, a strong swimmer and 5-year Coast Guard veteran, volunteered to play the role of distressed swimmer. Floating in a wetsuit about 20 yards from the boat, he waited while the crew prepared for retrieval. 15 minutes into the drill, Seaman Andrea Morales looked out on the port side and spotted movement beneath the surface. At first she thought it was a school of fish or a seal common in the area. Then it shifted toward Harper, and she realized it was a large shark. She shouted a warning, identifying its position relative to Harper. Wilson immediately ordered the retrieval protocol. Petty Officer Ryan Delaney turned the vessel toward Harper. Hearing the alert, Harper swam steadily toward the boat, careful not to splash, a tactic known to minimize attracting sharks. The shark, later identified as a juvenile great white around 12 feet long, approached from below. No one saw the moment of impact. Harper later said he felt an enormous pressure around his right leg before being yanked under. The shark bit mid-thigh, its jaws clamping with thousands of pounds of force. Harper's neoprene wetsuit and the shark's exploratory behavior, rather than a full attack, helped prevent worse damage. Drawing on training, Harper punched the shark's snout and eyes. The animal released him confused, allowing Harper to surface. Petty Officer Michael Chen saw Harper go under and resurface amid a spreading cloud of blood. The drill turned into a real rescue. Wilson ordered Delaney to position the boat between Harper and the shark, now circling back. Rodriguez and Morales deployed the rescue cradle. Chen tracked the dorsal fin, cutting toward them about 30 yards away and closing. Harper, bleeding and in pain, used his arms to swim the last few feet to the cradle. Rodriguez and Morales hauled him aboard as the shark made a second approach. Back on deck, Harper's injuries were clear. Semicircular lacerations around his thigh, blood pumping from the deepest wounds. Seaman Emma Parker, the medical specialist, applied a combat tourniquet and cut away the wetsuit to treat the injury. Wilson calmly reported the situation to base. Confirmed shark attack, significant leg trauma, en route to dock with ETA of 12 minutes. Parker stabilized Harper, started an IV, and monitored for shock. His skin was pale and his blood pressure dropped, but he remained conscious. Despite the pain, Harper joked and apologized for ruining the drill. Wilson gave a tight smile and told him to save it for the report. At the dock, emergency medical technicians were waiting. The transfer to the ambulance took less than 4 minutes. Given the severity of the injury, including a nicked femoral artery, Harper was taken to a hospital in Hyannis. Surgeons operated for over 5 hours to repair the damage. The timely tourniquet saved his life by slowing arterial bleeding without causing long-term tissue loss. News of the attack spread quickly through Coast Guard channels and local media. Harper's family flew in from Oregon. Wilson gave a short press briefing emphasizing that shark attacks were still rare, even with rising sightings in the area. Marine biologist Dr. Marcus Sandoval reviewed the case. He concluded the bite was exploratory, likely caused by the shark mistaking Harper for a seal. Had it been predatory, the injuries could have been fatal. Recovery was long and painful. Harper underwent multiple surgeries and months of physical therapy. Psychological trauma was equally difficult. He dealt with nightmares and anxiety tied to open water. The incident shook the Cape Cod Coast Guard community. Local officials increased shark monitoring and public education, balancing beach safety with respect for the region's thriving shark population. Port Douglas, Queensland, Australia, 2018. Port Douglas, nestled along the northeastern coast of Queensland, is better known for coral reefs than close encounters with predators. It sits at the edge of the Great Barrier Reef, a magnet for divers, snorkelers, and adventure seekers. Calm bays and mangrove-lined estuaries stretch for miles. Tourists often explore the area by kayak, especially in the early morning when the water is glassy and marine life is most active. Though shark sightings aren't uncommon this far north, attacks remain incredibly rare, especially from the fast and elusive mako shark. That made what happened to Rachel Brooks in May 2018 all the more alarming. Rachel, a 42-year-old physical therapist from Adelaide, had flown to Port Douglas for a solo getaway. She had booked a coastal cabin and packed light, just a few changes of clothes, a well-worn fishing rod, and her sleek blue kayak that she had custom-painted with native patterns years earlier. Her plan was simple: paddle, relax, and fish. A few days into her trip, she launched her kayak just before 6 a.m. from 4 Mile Beach. The tide was low and the wind calm. She paddled steadily northeast toward a shallow reef shelf she'd read about in a local guidebook. She was about 800 meters offshore when it happened. The water was unusually clear that morning. Schools of small fish darted beneath her, and the sun hadn't yet heated the sea surface. Rachel had just stopped paddling and was casting a light line off the side of her kayak when a sudden splash behind her snapped her out of her routine. She turned quickly but saw nothing, just the ripples. Then came the impact. A violent jolt slammed the right side of her kayak. The fiberglass hull cracked with the force, nearly throwing her off balance. Something had struck her from beneath. Before she could react, a large, torpedo-shaped shark burst halfway out of the water and latched onto the side of the kayak with rows of jagged teeth. The unmistakable blue-gray sheen and the long, pointed snout left no doubt it was a mako. Rachel later told reporters she hadn't even had time to scream. Her hands moved on instinct. She grabbed her paddle and struck the shark's head as hard as possible. It barely flinched. The shark thrashed, twisting the kayak and slapping the water with its powerful tail. One of its teeth grazed her left hand, leaving a gash between the thumb and index finger. She struck again, this time right at the shark's snout. That got its attention. The predator released its grip, dropping back into the water with a splash and a swirl. It circled once beneath her, then vanished. Rachel sat frozen, her breathing ragged. She didn't know whether to paddle or sit still. The ocean had gone quiet again, too quiet. But the shark didn't return. Keeping her bleeding hand elevated, she paddled slowly back toward the beach, stopping to look behind her every few strokes. The fractured hull was causing her kayak to take on water, and she had to lean to one side to keep balance. It took nearly 25 minutes, but she finally reached the shallows. Locals on the beach spotted her damaged boat and helped her out of the water. Rachel's injuries were mostly minor. A few stitches for the hand wound, some bruises on her legs from the impact, and a small scrape on her rib cage from the kayak's jagged edge. The psychological implications hit harder. She stayed in Port Douglas for the rest of the week but didn't go back into the ocean. Her kayak was left behind, cracked in 2 spots and scarred with bite marks. Marine biologists later examined photos of the bite radius and confirmed it was almost certainly a short-fin mako, likely over 8 feet long. They theorized the shark had mistaken her kayak for prey, possibly a seal or tuna, due to its size and movement. While makos are known for their speed and hunting ability, attacks on humans are extremely rare, especially on kayaks. Rachel returned to Adelaide with a new story and a permanent scar on her hand. Friends joked that she'd survived Australia's fastest shark, but the humor wore thin for her. She began attending weekly counseling for ocean-related anxiety. Despite that, she didn't sell her replacement kayak. As she told a local newspaper 6 months later, she didn't want fear to make her quit something she loved. She hadn't gone paddling again yet, but she said she planned to, eventually, just not in Port Douglas.